The PSP, one of the most memorable consoles of all time. It was portable, it was powerful, and in a true Sony fashion, it had a proprietary format that absolutely no one asked for. The PSP wasn't just another handheld, it was the first to bring true console-level power to your pocket. At a time when handheld gaming meant pixelated sprites and simple gameplay, Sony delivered a device that could run full 3D games on par with the PS2. But how did they pull it off? How did Sony manage to pack so much power into a handheld all the way back in 2004? Well, today I'm putting my computer science skills to work. We'll dive into the history, break down the technology, see how it holds up in 2025, and even take a peek at what the future might have in hold for this legendary handheld. It's the year 2000. The future is here. Technology is advancing at the speed of light, and gaming is evolving like a Pokemon on steroids. Handheld gaming is absolutely thriving, and at the top of the food chain sits Nintendo. They have been cranking out Game Boys like a cheat code for infinite money, and they're already scheming up the ways they're going to spend it on the next-gen consoles. Meanwhile, Sony just dropped the PlayStation 2, and it's a great success. Naturally, they decide to ride the hype train and proceed to make plans for something new and revolutionary. Their plan? The first ever portable console with real 3D gaming. Easier said than done. There was a reason nobody had attempted 3D gaming on a handheld before. The tech just wasn't there yet. The biggest hurdle? Storage. 3D games needed way more space than their 2D counterparts. Sure, compression techniques existed, but nothing that could shrink full-fledged 3D games down to a size that would fit on the standard memory cards of the time. However, there was one storage medium that could handle that much data while still being relatively cheap. CD-ROMs. The problem, a standard disc was about the same size as the PSP itself, if not bigger. So, naturally, Sony did what Sony does best, invent a proprietary storage solution, slap some marketing buzzwords on it, and act like it was revolutionary. Enter the UMD, a tiny disc inside the plastic shell that looked futuristic but was really just a desperate workaround for tech limitations of the time. Speaking of tech limitations, the other challenge the PSP had to overcome was the power output. To run 3D games, it needed a sufficiently powerful CPU and enough memory to load all the textures and 3D models required. The base PSP 1000 had a 333 MHz CPU, 32 MB of RAM, and a 1800 mAh battery. That might seem kinda dog water by today's standards, but compared to the king of handhelds at the time, the Game Boy Advance, which had a 16 MHz processor, it was a powerhouse. In fact, the PSP was approximately 20 times more powerful than the GBA. Once again, Sony's engineers in their infinite wisdom decided the UMD was a good idea, and in doing so, they created a whole new set of problems for themselves. For starters, the UMD consumed a lot of power, but that wasn't even the worst part. Somehow, all logic for reading the UMD also had to be handled. And a single CPU sure as hell wasn't doing all that. So, what was Sony's genius solution? They added a second processor. That's right, the PSP motherboard had a Tachyon CPU handling all the actual gaming, while the Lepton processor had one job: spin plastic disk and try not to explode. The UMD was such a catastrophic design choice that Sony basically created a portable device that needed double the processing power of its competitors just to overcome its own terrible media format. Imagine building a race car with square wheels and then adding a second engine just to make sure it moves at normal speeds. The PSP hardware launched with impressive specs, but serious optimization problems. Load times awful, the battery drained faster than my will to live editing this video, and the UMD drive spinning like a hamster wheel with a nest of angry hornets inside of it. So what dumb thing do you think Sony did to address all these problems? They restricted the CPU to 2/3 of its original power for the first few years. Because sure, why not? Who needs full performance when you can have half the power you actually paid for? Also, I'd like to add how ironically funny and self-serving of Sony is to name a processor after a particle faster than light and then proceed to make it slower on purpose. As for the UMD, it was so painfully slow that developers had to spend days, sometimes weeks, micromanaging memory allocation for their games just to keep the UMD from spinning into oblivion. If they didn't, you'd end up with load times reaching several minutes. WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2006 had load screens lasting 2 minutes, and that was after optimization. And yet, somehow, despite this absolute dumpster fire of engineering, the PSP was still an awesome handheld, because Sony brute forced it with raw processing power and actually achieved what no one else dared to do at the time. Still, I can't help but wonder, what kind of games could the PSP have actually run if all that power was allocated to gaming instead of spinning a plastic disc? One thing I genuinely love about the PSP hardware is the design. I can't overstate how beautiful every PSP model is. In a world full of boring rectangular slabs with buttons, the PSP stands out with the futuristic design and its ergonomic size. Even compared to modern handhelds like the Steam Deck or the Switch, the PSP is miles ahead in terms of pure aesthetics. However, there are two things that bug me. First, the lack of a second analog stick, a true tragedy. The PSP was this close to perfection. And the second, brace yourself because your childhood is about to be ruined, the off-center square button. What? You never noticed? Look again, the PSP 1000's massive screen extended so far to the right that Sony literally ran out of space for the square button. They had no choice but to shove it slightly off to the side, forever cursed to be just a little bit off compared to other buttons. And now that I told you, you can't unsee it. If I had to suffer, so do you. Oh, and the funniest part, when people complained about it, Sony's Ken Kutaragi, the father of PlayStation himself, just casually dropped this legendary response. The button's location is on purpose. There was a clear purpose to it and it wasn't a mistake. The man pulled a full Todd Howard before it was even cool. The button was later mysteriously fixed in the PSP 2000 and later models because nothing says intentional design like quietly redesigning it in every future version of the console. That brings us to the big 2025 and the PSP is still going strong, primarily thanks to the thriving modding community. Countless firmware mods, emulators, and homebrews keep the device feeling fresh and relevant. Not to mention 150 videos of modded PSPs with keychains on my For You page, mostly nostalgia bait, but who am I to judge, so is this video. I truly don't know any handheld with such a dedicated fanbase as the PSP, except for maybe PS Vita fans whose favorite hobbies consist of, but are not exclusive to, repeating that you can emulate the PSP on a Vita like a broken record and being annoying. I think the PSP's biggest strength in 2025 is emulation. The PSP can run emulators for the GB, GBA, and even Nintendo 64. And let's be real here, the games from this console might be superior to what the PSP has to offer. As a broke kid who never had an option of getting the Nintendo lineup of handhelds, I love playing those old games on a PSP of all things. Seriously, it's so cool. Some of these PSP games were my first contact with gaming as a concept, and honestly, it's a great first impression. And yes, that's a PSP Street, and objectively, it was the best looking one, and no one can prove me otherwise. So, will Sony be making a new PSP in 2025 or anytime soon? Only if they still enjoy making easy money. Let's be real here, the demand is there, the internet is drowning in PSP nostalgia, and it would be downright stupid of Sony not to cash in on our collective memory rot. The Steam Deck was a great success, and even Sony tested the waters by releasing that weird cloud gaming thingamabob called the PS Portal. The signs are here, people. It's only a matter of time and your consumer naivete. I honestly can't wait for this thing. I consider myself a PC gamer these days, but I'll definitely dip my toes into the PSP Remix remake, and by God, let's hope they don't release some garbage like UMD2 or Cloud Streaming Portable. That's it. If you enjoyed the video, remember, it's okay to like and subscribe if you feel pity for me. I promise I won't get mad. All the 3D files I used for this video are linked in the description for free if you want to use them for God knows what reason.